as we mentioned, many matrics from the class of 2018 may actually find that they performed better than anticipated in their final exams. Some may have even qualified for higher education access, but experts warn that these prospective students need to ensure that they do their homework before signing up for tertiary education studies so that they don't fall prey to institutions that are not registered and accredited or whose qualifications are not recognized. For more on this, we're in the studio with Sifiso Mnisi, who's Head of Program Faculty of Humanities at the Independent Institute of Education. A very good evening to you and welcome. Thank you so much for taking the time to speak to us.
Good evening, Sifiso, and to all the viewers sitting at home, and thank you for having me.
Let's first start with the root causes of why students find themselves with these late applications, and is it uniform across all sectors of society?
See, there are quite a number of reasons as to why students would find themselves in a situation where they find themselves applying late for higher education. They range from themselves perhaps not being sure whether they want to continue their studies post-matric. Some of the reasons include funds might be a problem for some of the students, only to find that they only have access to application fees after December. And at that time, they tend to become desperate to get access to higher education. And that is where the problem begins, because when they become desperate, they easily become victims of these unaccredited institutions.
Have you done a study just in terms of the demographics in this country, who's worst affected by this late application process, this panic application process?
One of the leading causes that lead to this panic application is around the issue of the digital divide that we have in the country, where you find that there are some students who do not have access to the internet, for example, and you find that they are unable to access information that can enable them to apply on time, or even to know about application dates so that they can start applying for higher education. And that's one of the problems. Another problem that we might have is that one thing that I've noticed is that some of the schools do not provide information to students on time with regards to applications for higher education.
I've noticed in the past there's been some sort of judgment accusing some of these students of either being lazy or not being ambitious enough. But it seems that this phenomenon is growing, that it's been reported that bogus tertiary institutions are on the rise. Do we have an idea of the figures?
I'm not sure about the figures as such, but what I can tell you is that around this time, this is when these bogus institutions begin to mushroom all over the country.
So what is the modus operandi? Have you figured it out? Do they target certain institutions, as in certain schools, certain areas of the country?
A trend that is evident is that these bogus institutions tend to target mostly students who did not do very well in their matric, because such students tend to have a difficult time when it comes to them accessing higher education within public institutions. So the second option for such students tends to become private providers of higher education, and those are the ones that in some instances tend to be unaccredited or unauthorized. So it is important for these students to ensure that if they choose a private provider of higher education, they check the accreditation status of such institutions. They can also verify their registration information through the Department of Higher Education.
Okay.
In the Register
Let me
of
just stop you there, because
Yes.
we're going to get to that, the distinction between the two, the public and the private providers. But I'm just curious, because many of the victims have said in the past that these institutions appear to be very legit, very authentic.
Sure.
So how do you circumvent that? How do you recognize a bogus institution without getting to the certification of the institution?
Well, the first thing that you'd need to have to do, of course, is to look at the course that they are claiming to offer and verify the accreditation status of that qualification going onto the Department of Higher Education and Training's website.
So who've been the biggest culprits? Is it the public higher education and training institutions or the private providers so far?
So it is difficult to then say who has been the culprits, who are the leading culprits in this, but we have noticed that some of these institutions tend to be the ones that would find them handing out flyers at robots, for example, marketing themselves and offering these low fees without making a huge emphasis on results, for example. They are willing to accept a student with low results.
So for students and parents out there, should that be the first warning? If people are pushing hard to have you at their institutions, or if they are advertising themselves in that manner, should that raise a first warning flag?
I think it would be unfair to say that if people hand out flyers at the robots, then that should be the first as a flag to pay attention to. The thing that you need to do in order to verify the accreditation status of an institution is to visit the Department of Higher Education and Training website.
So let's talk about the Department of Higher Education. What are the legalities around the recognition and registration of these institutions?
Okay, so what happens is when an organization or an institution of higher education wishes to offer a qualification, it needs to be accredited by the CHE, which is the Council on Higher Education. So they are the ones who are responsible for accrediting programs. And once the CHE has accredited a program, it will then be registered in the registry of qualifications with the Department of Higher Education and Training.
And that's the reason I'm asking this question, sure. Because the assumption is if it's a public institution and it is established by the DHET, it automatically therefore means that because it's been established by law, it is therefore accredited.
If it has been accredited, then it has authority to offer a qualification.
So who takes responsibility for the fact that that public institution is accredited? Because as I say, the assumption would be if it's established by law by the Department of Higher Education, the assumption is therefore that it's accredited.
So if you suspect that an institution is not accredited, you then need to contact the Council on Higher Education and report that bogus institution, because they are the ones who are responsible for accrediting programs that will be offered by the various institutions.
So you spoke earlier on about the certificates that help you ascertain whether or not an institution is legitimate. If you ask for a certificate, what should you expect to find there?
You need to find number one, the registration number of that institution, and then go on to the Department of Higher Education and Training's website to check for the qualification, because they do have a registry on that website of the institutions that are registered, as well as the qualifications that they can legally offer.
Yeah. And if an institution refuses to give you or show you the certificate, does that automatically mean that they're bogus?
Yeah, you see, that is a problem, because it means they're not transparent enough, and you cannot trust an institution that has a problem of transparency. So my advice in that situation would be that a student leaves that institution. What
happens if you've already been studying there for a period of time? So you've lost money, you've lost opportunity in terms of the time put towards your study. What recourse do you have?
See, that is a problem then, because it means that you would have been disadvantaged further in terms of finances and in terms of time. So your recourse would then be to report that institution to the authorities, as well as the Council on Higher Education. The Council on Higher Education, then they would take the necessary steps.
And the Central Application Clearinghouse, what help can they be to you?
I think then those people would be responsible for ensuring that students are not taken advantage of, and also they assist with the screening processes as well.
The courts, are they able to intervene at any point?
If an institution is purporting to be offering a qualification that they are not supposed to be offering, then that becomes a legal issue, and definitely once things are illegal, then the courts would step in.
Thank you so much for your time and your insights. That is Sifiso Mnisi. He is Head of Program, Faculty of Humanities at the Independent Institute of Education.